The downpour came suddenly, hammering against the windshield like a warning. Maxwell Kane gritted his teeth, glaring at the blinking dashboard of his custom-engineered, seven-figure luxury car. Dead. Not just sputtering, completely lifeless. His phone had 1 bar of reception, and the rain was too thick to see more than a few feet ahead. No assistance, no security detail, no help. A CEO known for building empires was now trapped by something as ridiculous as a faulty fuel sensor. He stepped out, soaked instantly. His Italian leather shoes squelched in roadside mud as he kicked the tire in frustration. He wasn't used to inconvenience. People moved when he snapped his fingers. Problems were handled before he was aware they existed. But now, on a quiet backroad between a tech summit and his private estate, there was nothing but silence and water. Then, like fate playing its favorite joke, a beat-up minivan coughed its way around the bend and screeched to a stop a few yards behind him. It rattled like a dying toaster oven. The door opened with a groan and out stepped a woman in joggers, a hoodie 2 sizes too big, and rainbow sneakers stained with years of effort. She looked like chaos in motion. Grocery bags tumbled out behind her as she half ran, half skated over the wet gravel. "You all right?" she called, shielding her eyes from the rain. Max stared. He didn't respond. Was this a scam? A setup? This road wasn't well traveled. He was cautious by nature, made paranoid by necessity. She didn't wait for an invitation. "Pop the hood," she shouted. "I don't need," he began. "Oh, you definitely do." She grinned. "Smoke from the grill isn't normal, even if your car costs more than my house." The hood released with a hiss. She didn't hesitate. In seconds, she was elbow-deep inside, pulling wires and poking parts with a plastic pen. Her fingers worked fast, confidently. Rain slid down her cheeks and soaked her clothes, but she didn't seem to care. "Hybrid, right? That's your issue. You've got a misfire on the relay. Looks like water got in. Shouldn't be exposed like this. Over-engineered nonsense." Max's mouth opened, then closed again. She had no badge, no uniform, no authority, but somehow she knew exactly what she was talking about. He watched her reach for her back pocket and pull out a wrench with a floral pattern on the grip. He couldn't stop staring. And then he saw it. The ring. Delicate. Custom. Silver with an odd twist of rose gold around a black gem. A unique piece, one he'd seen just this morning in an encrypted file sent by his legal team. The woman he was supposed to fake engage for PR purposes wore that exact ring in the draft photos. A corporate plant, perhaps? His board had been pushing for this for months, a carefully controlled image to humanize him, to soften his cold reputation before the merger vote next week. And now she just shows up? His mind spun. Had the meeting been moved? Was this part of their plan? Was he being tested? "You're early," he said, voice low and cautious. "Huh?" she asked, still fiddling with the relay box. Max took a step back. "I thought you weren't arriving until this afternoon." She blinked. "I what?" He gestured at her hand. "The ring." She looked at it, a flicker of sadness crossing her face. "Oh, that. My grandmother's. Been wearing it since she passed." He didn't hear that part, or didn't process it. He was too busy scanning the woods, searching for cameras, drones, anything that would suggest this was a setup. She tapped the relay with her wrench. The engine clicked. A brief spark, then life. The car hummed back into function. "See," she beamed. "Just needed a little attention." Max nodded slowly. You're good." She wiped her hands on her hoodie. "I get by." And then it came to him. If this was a test, if she was the corporate plant, the PR maneuver, the fake fiancé, then he had to play his part. The merger depended on it. The board had threatened to pull votes if he didn't show emotional growth. If this was how they wanted to do it, fine. He could pretend. "My driver's car is 5 minutes away," he said. "Let me offer you a ride. It's the least I can do." She hesitated, then looked at her dead minivan. "Well, my battery's cooked. So, sure. But no funny business. He forced a smile. Wouldn't dream of it. Inside, his mind raced. Who was she, really? An actress? A consultant? A rival's spy? She had no digital footprint. He'd never seen her at industry events. Yet here she was, confidently elbow-deep in a luxury engine and saving his day. He opened the door for her. She raised an eyebrow. Chivalry's not dead, huh? No, he said. Just rare. The ride arrived moments later, another high-end car. She climbed in, tracking rain and the scent of cheap detergent onto his pristine leather seat. She didn't apologize. As they drove, she hummed to herself and scrolled through a cracked phone screen. He glanced over. No social media? He asked. Not really my thing, she said. Privacy. Reality, she corrected. No time to flex when you're fixing transmissions and folding laundry. Her voice had depth. Unpolished. Grounded. It rattled him more than he expected. She didn't want anything from him. She didn't even seem impressed by his car or status. He was used to models, influencers, investors, and gold-plated pretenders. This woman offered unsolicited help, got soaked doing it, and never once asked who he was. The silence in the car thickened. You live around here? He asked. Few towns over. Just dropping off groceries before heading to work. Or I was, until your spaceship broke down. He chuckled. Genuinely. For the first time in weeks. She glanced sideways. So, are you always this formal, or is that part of the billionaire starter pack? He flinched. She laughed. Relax. I googled your name on the ride here. You're kind of a big deal, right? Kind of. She nodded, unimpressed. Well, Mr. Big Deal, you owe me one. Preferably a new car battery. He smiled, but inside, he was spiraling. If she wasn't the fake fiancée, then who was she? And why did it feel like fate had just knocked the gears loose in his perfect life? The moment she left, everything went quiet again. But it wasn't the peaceful kind of silence. It was the kind that wrapped around Maxwell's neck like a noose. He stared at the receipt she'd left behind, tucked into the seat back pocket like an afterthought. Nothing flashy, just a local grocery store stub, scribbled with a child's doodle on the back. A little rocket ship drawn in blue crayon, flying above stick figures labeled Mom and Me. Something tightened in his chest. Her name wasn't even on the paper, just Emily. He'd never even asked her last name. Later that night, his board's PR manager called, asking for updates on the fake fiancé photo shoot. He lied, said everything was progressing naturally. He wasn't even sure why. Maybe it was the way she hadn't cared who he was. Maybe it was the fact that she saved him when he looked helpless. Maybe it was the ring. Whatever the reason, she lingered in his mind like a song stuck on repeat. The following day, he showed up at the grocery store listed on the receipt. He asked for her, casually at first, then with escalating curiosity when the first clerk said they didn't know an Emily. The manager eventually recognized the description. Oh, you mean Emily Jameson, the woman said. Drives that poor old van? She's a good one. Lost her husband 3 years back, works 2 jobs, takes care of her kid like a champ. Maxwell blinked. Widow. That explained the ring. He left the store quietly, conflicted. This wasn't part of the plan. She wasn't a plant. She wasn't hired to fix his image. She was just herself. He couldn't shake the thought of her smiling in the rain, wrench in hand, laughing at his spaceship car. She didn't fit into his world, and maybe that's why it was tempting. Meanwhile, Emily was trying to forget the whole thing. It wasn't every day you helped a millionaire and ended up riding in his backup luxury car. She'd told her son a sanitized version of the story. Mommy helped a man with car trouble. But her brain kept returning to his face when he saw her ring. Like he'd seen a ghost. She had no time to daydream, though. Rent was due. Laundry needed folding. She had to cover a double shift at the garage after one of the techs called in sick. Emily was no stranger to crisis. It lived with her. The water heater breaking, her son's school trip fees, balancing the monthly budget with surgical precision. Resilience wasn't a choice, it was the only option. Then came the envelope, delivered by courier. No return address. Inside, a letter with a crisp white card that read simply, "I believe I owe you a battery. And maybe a little more." At first, she laughed it off. But curiosity got the better of her. She dialed the number printed in the corner, expecting voicemail or an assistant. Instead, she got Max. "You tracked me down," she said. "You left a receipt in my car." "Maybe I meant to," she teased, before quickly correcting herself. "Kidding. I didn't." "I want to talk," he said. "No strings. Just a conversation. I don't have time for rich guy experiments." "Then let me make it worth your while." That line nearly made her hang up. But there was something in his voice, not arrogance, not pity. It was honesty, maybe even desperation. She agreed to meet at a neutral spot. Nothing fancy. A community cafe where millionaires didn't usually go unless they were funding something for tax credit. When she walked in, Max was already there. No suit. Just a t-shirt and jeans, like someone trying hard not to be noticed. He stood when he saw her. "You're braver than I thought," she said. "I could say the same." They talked. And surprisingly, it wasn't weird. They talked about engines, about why most luxury cars were overly complicated, about parenting. He asked about her son. She asked about his childhood. He confessed his parents had thrown him into boarding school at 8. She told him her mother raised her on tips and night shift. Their worlds were galaxies apart, but pain? That, they understood in the same language. Then came the question he didn't expect. "Why'd you think I was someone else?" she asked. He hesitated. "You wore a ring identical to the one the board gave the woman they hired to be my fake fiancée." Emily blinked. "Wait, fake. It's a corporate thing. They wanted to soften my image. Add a family angle. I never went through with it." "And you thought I was her?" "I did." She laughed so hard, people turned to stare. "That's the dumbest thing I've heard all week." "I deserved that." "Yes, you did." But then her face softened. "You know what? That actually makes sense. You panic because someone unexpected shows up during a crisis, so you assume the worst." He looked down. "That's my default. Distrust. Control. I get it. You're used to being burned." He glanced up. "You too." She nodded. "You don't get to where I am without people letting you down." But I stopped expecting the worst. It was exhausting. Max fell silent. He wasn't used to people being that raw. Emily had no agenda. She wasn't there to impress him or ask for favors. And that made her the most disarming person he'd met in years. On her way out, she handed him a small envelope. "What's this?" he asked. "A real thank you note. For listening." He waited until she left to open it. Inside, a small card. "People break down sometimes. Doesn't mean they're broken. Thanks for remembering that." No signature. No number. Just that. Max stared at it like it held the key to something he didn't know he'd lost. He returned to his office that night and called off the entire fake fiancé plan. The PR manager ranted about timing, optics, and investor expectations. He didn't care. Something in him had shifted. Not because he'd been rescued, but because, for the first time in a long time, someone had seen the man, not the name. 2 weeks passed. Emily figured that was that. A one-time encounter, a brief human connection. Whatever that moment had been, it didn't belong in her reality. She had bills to pay, an oil change to finish, and a science fair costume to help her son make from cardboard and duct tape. Her life didn't leave space for mysterious billionaires and polite misunderstandings. But Maxwell couldn't shake her from his thoughts. Every time he sat in a boardroom, he heard her voice questioning his default setting. Every time a PR manager pushed an agenda, he remembered her laugh cutting through corporate nonsense like a blowtorch through ice. For the first time, the board noticed something different about him. He was softer, calmer. And it wasn't weakness. It was leadership with empathy. Investors responded better. Staff morale improved. One junior employee even dared to voice an idea in a meeting, a first. Max hadn't realized how much of his company was built on fear. One morning, he made a decision. Not romantic, not impulsive. Strategic. He walked into the PR division and dropped a folder on the table. "This is our new campaign," he said. They flipped it open. Inside, stories of real people. Community heroes. Single parents, janitors, lunch ladies, foster dads, struggling veterans. Each with a short quote about resilience, leadership, growth. At the top of the pitch deck, "We're not selling products. We're sharing purpose." "Where's the celebrity angle?" someone asked. "No celebrities," Max replied. "Only people who never get seen." There was silence. Then cautious nods. They didn't fully get it, but they trusted him. Emily didn't hear from him directly. Not until the invitation arrived. Not a text, not a call, just a letter, hand-delivered again. A real one this time, with a signature. Maxwell Bishop. Inside, a request. He wanted her to be the first story in the company's new campaign. She stared at it like it was a joke. Emily Jameson, mechanic and single mom, in a billion-dollar campaign? Her first reaction was suspicion. Then laughter. Then anger. She wasn't a project. She wasn't anyone's token example of, "Look how kind the rich guy is." So she showed up to his office, not to say yes, but to confront him. "You think I'm some kind of redemption arc for you?" she asked, arms folded. "No," Max said quietly. "I think you're the kind of person we're supposed to be building for, and I think I need to use my platform for something better. You don't even know me. I'm trying to. You helped me when I had nothing to offer. Not because of who I am, but in spite of it." She watched him. He wasn't performing. There was no polished speech, no lawyer in the corner. Just a man trying to undo years of being taught to win instead of connect. Still, she shook her head. "I don't want attention. Then we don't use your name. We tell your story with your voice and protect your privacy. Or you can walk away. No pressure." It was the first time someone with that much power had ever asked instead of assumed. She said she'd think about it. That night, she sat at the kitchen table, her son asleep in the next room, the envelope on the counter. She thought about legacy. About her boy growing up in a world that never expected much from kids like him. What if her story helped rewrite that? What if she could open a door for someone else? She called Max the next morning. "I'm in. But on my terms." He agreed without hesitation. The campaign launched quietly. No billboards, no TV ads. Just short online stories shared through the company's community platform. Emily's story led the way. A woman who fixed cars, raised a kid, survived heartbreak, and still showed up with kindness in her toolbox. No glamour. Just grit. The response was overwhelming. Thousands of comments. People saw themselves in her. Single parents, immigrants, survivors, former foster kids. It resonated across cultures, across politics. It wasn't just empathy. It was recognition. The campaign went viral. Not because it was flashy, but because it was real. For the first time in the company's history, public trust in Maxwell's firm surged not because of a product, but because of a principle. Emily's garage became busier. Not with rich people, but with locals who wanted their cars fixed by someone who didn't just do a job, but who lived with purpose. Her landlord called, offering to reduce her rent in exchange for speaking to his niece's school class. She politely declined the rent deal, but visited the school anyway. When a local news outlet asked to interview her, she declined again. "I'm not a celebrity," she said. "I'm just someone who believes in showing up." Max showed up too, quietly. At the school, at the garage. Never overstepping. Just watching, learning. He wasn't in love with her. Not yet. This wasn't a fairy tale. This was transformation. His, hers, theirs. They talked more. Not about wealth or status. About fairness, equity, Parenting. How hard it was to explain prejudice to a child who just wanted to make friends. How systems failed people silently. How some battles were invisible but exhausting. Emily challenged him. He welcomed it. And somewhere in that shared space of discomfort and growth, trust formed. Not romantic sparks, but respect. And that was stronger. One night, Emily asked him point-blank, "Why are you really doing this?" Max hesitated, then said, "Because for the first time, I feel like I'm building something worth inheriting." That word, inheriting, hit her differently. Legacy wasn't money. It was memory, impact. What you left behind that helped someone stand taller. Emily didn't need his charity. But she saw in him a man trying to change, not for applause but for accountability. She told him, "Don't do this for me. Do it so the next woman like me doesn't have to fight so hard to be seen." That was the moment Maxwell truly understood. He wasn't helping her. She was mentoring him. And maybe that's how change really begins. Not with grand gestures, but with quiet course corrections by people brave enough to speak, and people humble enough to listen. It started with a school fundraiser. Maxwell showed up unannounced. No press, no entourage. Just him in jeans and a t-shirt, awkwardly holding a tray of cupcakes next to Emily and her son. People stared. Some recognized him. Others whispered. But nobody treated him like royalty. And for the first time in years, he felt normal. Invisible in the best way. He liked it. Emily noticed. She saw how he carried himself differently. Less performance, more presence. He wasn't just showing up for her. He was showing up for the people who'd never mattered to him before. When the school principal asked for donations, Maxwell didn't write a check. He volunteered his company's engineers to run a free STEM camp for underprivileged students. No branding, no strings. Just access. That decision sparked more. One of the janitors, a quiet Nigerian man named Samuel, approached Emily later that week and said, "For the first time, my son believes he belongs in science." That hit her harder than anything Max had said. Meanwhile, the board of directors was restless. Profits had dipped slightly, not because of the campaign, but because Max was redirecting funds to social programs, partnerships, employee development. Shareholders wanted numbers. But Maxwell stood his ground. "I'm not building for this quarter," he said in the boardroom. "I'm building for 50 years from now." Some mocked him behind his back. Others doubted him. But a few, especially the younger, diverse voices who'd always been overlooked, stood taller after that meeting. Change was slow, but it had begun. Emily kept him at arm's length. Not out of fear, but out of discipline. She'd seen too many men say the right thing until it no longer benefited them. She wasn't looking for a savior. She was raising a boy. Her priority was survival, not romance. But Max didn't flirt. He listened. He didn't make promises. He made progress. They started taking walks. Casual conversations about parenting, life, pain. One day she told him about the ring he'd panicked over when they met. It wasn't from a marriage. It was a promise ring she'd bought herself after her son was born, when she swore she'd never settle again. She wore it as a reminder that her worth wasn't measured by who claimed her. Max didn't laugh. He said, "That's the most powerful thing I've heard in a decade." Still, the world outside wasn't as patient. A tabloid eventually caught wind of their connection. A photo leaked. Maxwell sitting with Emily at a community event, laughing, a plate of grilled cheese between them. The headline read, "Billionaire falls for garage girl?" Emily was furious. Her garage lost a few wealthy clients. Parents at the school whispered behind her back. Her son came home crying one day after another kid called him pity boy. She stormed into Max's office. "This is why I didn't want attention," she snapped. "Your world burns everything it touches." Max looked her in the eyes and said, "Then I'll set fire to the story." He held a press conference the next day, not to deny the rumors but to confront the truth. "She's not a fling," he said plainly. "She's not a project. She's not a trophy. She's a teacher, a mentor, a voice I've needed to hear for most of my life. She's also none of your business. And if your problem is that she's a mechanic, or a mother, or wears oil-stained boots, then maybe the problem isn't her. That clip went viral. Not because it was romantic. Because it was rare. A powerful man didn't claim her. He defended her. But Emily wasn't impressed by speeches. She watched what he did after. Max cut ties with media outlets that exploited people. He launched a media literacy fund for public schools. And he stopped taking credit. Every new initiative he led was in the name of his employees, his community, the people who'd been silenced for decades under corporate rule. At the next board meeting, a senior executive tried to downplay diversity efforts as symbolic. Max interrupted. Symbolism doesn't build bridges. People do. The boardroom went quiet. Emily, meanwhile, doubled down on her life. She expanded her garage into a mentorship program, taught high school girls how to work engines, negotiate labor rates, and recognize discrimination when it wore a polite face. She started speaking at trade schools, not as a success story but as a warning. Know your worth, she told them, because the world will try to sell it back to you with conditions. Max watched from the sidelines, proud, respectful, distant, until one day her son invited him to his birthday party. Simple backyard, grilled burgers, paper plates. Max brought books, tools, a letter he'd written to the boy, advice he wished someone had given him at that age. It said nothing about wealth, only about integrity, failure, courage, and grace. Emily read it later and cried quietly in her room. Not because of Max, because of what her son saw in him. That night, she asked Max a question. Do you know why I finally let you in? He shook his head. Because you never tried to save me. You let me fight my own battles. But you showed up anyway. Max didn't reply. He just nodded. And smiled. No romance yet. No kiss. Just mutual strength. But sometimes love starts with partnership. With two people building side by side, not needing to fix each other, but believing enough to grow together. Emily didn't wear her ring to remind herself anymore. She wore it to remind the world. She chose this life. Every day. With or without applause. And now, she had someone beside her who respected that choice. Not as a fairy tale, but as the future. The ripple effect wasn't loud, but it was unmistakable. A mechanics mentorship garage became a case study at state universities. Not because it was flashy but because it worked. Graduation rates among young girls in her program doubled. Several girls went on to engineering schools. Others launched their own side hustles, mobile repairs, tire services, even custom restoration shop. Emily didn't just teach them mechanics. She taught them agency. Maxwell saw this and didn't try to take credit. Instead, he asked her to consult for his company's apprenticeship programs. She refused the title diversity consultant. Instead, she insisted on equity architect. Words mattered. She wasn't checking boxes. She was rethinking the whole system. At corporate meetings, she questioned why executive tracks never included single parents, why leadership pipelines required 70-hour weeks with no childcare, why emotional intelligence was treated like a liability instead of an asset. Her tone was respectful, but sharp, precise. She didn't flinch. And some board members were clearly uncomfortable. But Max backed her with data. Retention rates were higher among employees who participated in community mentoring. Women in technical roles reported more satisfaction and upward mobility when leadership training included mentorship models. Shareholders couldn't argue with growth. Soon, Emily's voice stopped being the external partner and became the conscience of the company. Not because she demanded power, but because she wielded impact. Still, pushback came. An anonymous leak to a news outlet claimed she only rose because of her relationship with Maxwell. The article implied she was a charity case, a feel-good symbol used to mask deeper corporate problems. The story hurt. It wasn't just an attack on her, It was an attempt to erase every hour she'd earned, every girl she'd trained, every fight she'd faced alone. She didn't go on camera. Didn't issue a statement. Instead, she invited a documentary crew to follow her mentorship students for 1 month. No scripts, no filters. The result was raw. A young Latina student in tears because she'd just fixed her first engine solo. A black teenager who said she'd never believed someone like her could lead until she met Emily. A quiet Muslim girl designing her own diagnostic app. No voiceover. Just real voices. The documentary dropped. It trended for a week straight. Not because it was dramatic. Because it was honest. People connected with it. Not out of pity, but pride. Max's company issued an apology. Not for Emily, but to her. The board commissioned a full investigation into internal bias and vowed transparency. Several senior executives resigned or were reassigned after their discriminatory practices surfaced. Not a PR stunt, accountability. Max didn't rescue Emily from the fire. He stood in it with her. And she didn't collapse. She sharpened. Meanwhile, her son was growing up. No longer just the reason she worked hard, but a symbol of why the world had to change. He started standing up to bullies at school. Not with fists. With facts. He told a teacher once, "My mom says being underestimated is fuel. So go ahead." Max, watching from the sidelines, realized something deeper. He wasn't just changing a company. He was being changed. This wasn't charity. This was evolution. And he owed it to every person he'd overlooked in his climb. So he made a decision that shocked even Emily. He stepped down as CEO. Not out of shame, but purpose. "I built this company with my head," he said at the final shareholder meeting. "But the future deserves people who lead with their hearts, too. I'm not retiring. I'm rebuilding." The new CEO was a woman of color, a former refugee turned data scientist who had once been rejected by Max's company years ago. Emily had introduced them. Now, she would lead with both brilliance and empathy. Max would focus on outreach, mentorship, rebuilding trust with communities his industry had long ignored. And still, no romantic declarations. No headlines about weddings or rings. Just a bond forged in respect. One evening, Max visited Emily at the garage. He found her under a car, laughing with 2 girls as they debated socket sizes. He waited until she was done, then handed her a small box. Inside was the same ring she wore when they met, cleaned, polished, reset. Nothing added. Nothing removed. He said, "I'm not asking you to marry me. I'm asking if I can stand beside the version of you that chose this ring before she ever knew me." Emily smiled. Not because of the ring. Because of the man holding it. They weren't fairy tale characters. They were survivors. Warriors of a different kind. He wasn't her rescue. She wasn't his rehab. Together, they had created something new, not just love, but legacy. Later that year, the mentorship garage was renamed the Phoenix Initiative. Not after Max. Not even after Emily. But after the spirit that rises when the world tries to burn you down and you come back building more than just yourself. You build hope. It became a model replicated in 6 other states. Tech firms funded it. Local governments partnered with it. But the core principle stayed untouched. Real transformation starts with seeing value in people who were always there, just never given the mic. And somewhere in the middle of it all, a boy grew into a young man, watching a mother rise without bitterness, and a billionaire learn to lead without ego. That boy would later say, "I didn't grow up with a perfect family. I grew up with a powerful one." Because it was never about the car. It was about who gets out and helps, even when no one's watching. Even when the engine isn't the only thing that's broken. And who stays to help fix what's underneath. Maxwell's world shifted again, quietly, but with the weight of a tidal wave. It began with an unexpected phone call from a community leader in a low-income neighborhood. They'd heard about the Phoenix Initiative and wanted help setting up a similar program. They asked Maxwell to speak at a local town hall. Hesitant at first, He accepted, knowing Emily's work had sparked this. When he arrived, the crowd was diverse. Young, old, hopeful, skeptical. Faces marked by struggle, but glowing with potential. Maxwell spoke not as a billionaire CEO, but as a man who had learned to listen. He talked about accountability, not just for corporations but for himself. He admitted his blind spots, his past prejudice, and how Emily had challenged every assumption he'd ever held. The crowd didn't cheer. They didn't applaud. They listened. That silence was louder than applause. It was respect. In the weeks that followed, Maxwell devoted himself to community advocacy. He attended school board meetings, pushed for funding to keep technical programs alive in underfunded schools, and met with local business owners to create job pipelines for marginalized youth. Emily watched this transformation with quiet pride. She saw in Maxwell a rare kind of leadership, a willingness to be vulnerable, to be wrong, to grow. It wasn't charity or obligation. It was genuine change. Meanwhile, Emily's garage buzzed with energy. The girls she mentored began taking on more responsibility, leading workshops, teaching younger kids. Their confidence grew. So did their ambitions. One student secured a scholarship to a top engineering university. Another started a crowdfunding campaign to buy tools for apprenticeships in her community. Emily knew this was only the beginning. The biggest test came when a major competitor launched a smear campaign against the Phoenix Initiative, accusing it of exploiting disadvantaged youth for corporate gain. The media picked it up, framing Emily as a pawn in a billionaire's PR game. The same old prejudices resurfaced: dismissal, disbelief, and outright hostility. Instead of retreating, Emily confronted the criticism head-on. She organized a public forum where her students spoke about their experiences. They shared stories of hardship, resilience, and growth. They described the initiative not as charity, but as empowerment. The tide turned. Public opinion shifted. Donations poured in. More companies reached out for partnerships. Emily's mentorship program was no longer just a local success, it was a movement. Maxwell, too, faced his own reckoning. Some shareholders pushed back against his decision to prioritize community impact over profit margins. Boardroom battles erupted, testing his resolve. But he stood firm, arguing that true leadership required empathy and responsibility, not just bottom lines. Behind closed doors, Maxwell and Emily strategized about the future. They envisioned a world where corporate success and social justice were not mutually exclusive. They dreamed of a culture where diversity, inclusion, and equality weren't just buzzwords but the foundation of every decision. Their partnership deepened, not just as allies but as leaders forging a path forward. One afternoon, Emily received a call from her son's school principal. Her son had been nominated for a leadership award, recognized for his empathy and courage. It was a reminder that the legacy they were building wasn't just about them. It was about the generations to come. Maxwell and Emily attended the awards ceremony together, standing side by side. No flashy displays, no grand declarations. Just two people committed to change, inspired by each other's strength. That evening, as they walked through the city streets, Maxwell turned to Emily and said, "We've come a long way." She smiled. "And we're just getting started." The ring on her finger caught the streetlight, a symbol not of possession, but of partnership. A promise to keep pushing boundaries, challenging norms, and creating opportunities where none existed before. Because in their story, love wasn't about perfect beginnings or fairy tale endings. It was about resilience, redemption, and the courage to keep moving forward, even when the road was uncertain. And together, they would lead that journey. The moment the Phoenix Initiative's success became undeniable, it sparked a larger cultural shift. What started as a single garage mentoring a handful of girls transformed into a beacon for communities across the country. Other companies took notice, adopting similar models. The conversation about inclusion and equity no longer lived in the shadows, it was center stage. Maxwell found himself invited to speak at international conferences, sharing the hard lessons learned from embracing empathy in leadership. He no longer spoke as a detached CEO but as a man transformed by experience, accountable, humbled, and driven by a vision bigger than profit margins. Emily's story inspired countless single parents balancing impossible odds. She was no longer just a mechanic. She was a symbol of resilience, growth, and leadership. Women reached out to her not just for guidance in mechanics but for mentorship in life. She embraced these roles wholeheartedly, recognizing the power of representation and legacy. Her son, now a young teenager, absorbed the lessons unfolding around him. He saw firsthand the strength in forgiveness, the value of empathy, and the power of standing up for what's right, even when it meant challenging those in power. He often said, "It's not about where you start, but where you decide to go." Together, Maxwell and Emily spearheaded initiatives to dismantle systemic barriers that had long sidelined marginalized communities. They advocated for policy changes in education and corporate hiring practices, fighting prejudice and discrimination not just through words but through measurable actions. There were setbacks, of course. Old habits die hard. Resistance from traditionalists remained strong. Some whispered that Maxwell was distracted from business, that Emily was too ambitious. Yet each obstacle only strengthened their resolve. In boardrooms and classrooms alike, they demonstrated that leadership was not about ego but about lifting others. Their partnership became a model for intersectional leadership, where diversity and inclusion are the engines of innovation and progress. Their legacy wasn't just a program or a company but a movement toward equality and justice that transcended industries and borders. The ring Emily wore was no longer just a symbol of a complicated past, it was a badge of honor for the battles fought and the victories won. Years later, as they stood together watching a new generation of leaders emerge from the Phoenix Initiative's programs, they knew the story was far from over. But the foundations were strong, built on accountability, forgiveness, and relentless hope. Emily's voice remained steady, echoing in every success story. We fix what's broken not by ignoring it, but by facing it head-on, with courage, empathy, and unwavering commitment. Maxwell nodded, knowing that true transformation starts from within. Their journey had been one of resilience, redemption, and radical growth, a testament to the power of seeing beyond the surface and believing in people's potential. The road ahead was still long, but they were ready. Because they had learned that sometimes the most broken things hold the greatest power to rebuild, not just cars or companies, but lives, communities, and futures. And that was the real victory.